What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to the Daily Dime here on Thursday, one of our favorite types of days here, doubleheader for NBA and NFL on this fine Thursday. Triple header if you include the Hero World Challenge over in the golf world, by the way. Couldn't find any props that I liked for it. No surprise there. The PGA product over there, not great on any of those sites. But sometimes we find some good ones. Obviously, it's much better when we're actually in like prime PGA season and they're giving us a lot of options. But yeah, I think we were talking backstage about this football game, and it's a tough one to kind of find things that we really like. So we'll talk a little bit about the football game, and then of course we'll talk through some NBA picks, and maybe we can find a 3-pick play, 6-pick play. How are you feeling about the NBA slate here, Zach?
I'm very excited for this slate, both from a props and DFS perspective. I think I've got at least one of these props we're going to talk about from the hoop side of things. I think is very, very strong here. Obviously, we'll talk about that, but look, in the spirit, and we've had there's a little bit of tilting going on in the Pick 'em Games channel this morning. So I can get into the spirit, right? Chris Dunn, we needed the over 1.5 steals last night for the 3-pick from the stream to come through. But man, by the time that first quarter ended, it was like, we know he has to get this in 3 quarters.
Yeah.
Because this game is done. It was trash. It was 86-47 at one point.
Yeah.
So
it was 74-37. Like they were doubling him up, 74-37.
It doesn't really matter when you checked in on the game. You had a score that burned into your brain. That's how bad it was last night. But so you come up one steal short there. But I'm glad you got the tracker up too, because I think that's something we should also talk about. Like, I know you and I are both big on having that transparency with the history of the picks and everything. So our FTN Fantasy subscribers now have access to that Google sheet tracking all of our picks here from the stream and in the chat. And like you said,
in fact, why don't I actually bring that up momentarily? Because I think it's a good conversation to have, honestly, because we've had like this massive amount of success in the NFL this season. And I'll bring up the analysis first. You can see like 130% ROI in NFL, 19% so far in NBA. And so you think, oh man, why are we so much more successful in NFL than NBA? But then you look at the actual pick accuracy, like 62% in NFL versus just under 60% in NBA. That's not accounting for that difference. We've also been 62.5% on these multipliers. So like in the last 2 days, for example, no wins, and yet we've been 60%, 6 of 10, including 50% of those being multipliers of 1.05x or higher. So we're basically like just as successful in NBA as NFL when it comes to the individual picks. And there's just some randomness and variance that you have to let kind of even out in the long run when it comes to the actual results of those 3-pick plays, and especially the 6-pick plays. So yeah, just kind of hang tight, and the big wins on the NBA side are coming too.
Yeah, absolutely, right? It's you think back to the 8-pick play that you hit a couple weeks ago, right? That is what you're waiting for, one of those big nights. And we've been dancing around it here. 4 of 6, I believe, last night. Might have been 3 and 3 at the end of things, but like you said, 6 of 10 over the last 2 days. So look, man, let's jump into tonight. Like you said, we got NFL, we got NBA. We love these Monday and Thursday Daily Dime streams. So you want to start on the hoop side of things, or do you want to talk Thursday night football?
Yeah, why don't we start with the football game? So this is a bit of an interesting game, as I said, because for one thing, these are divisional teams who know each other really well. This is a huge game. So you know that both teams are kind of putting a little bit more thought into the game plan than usual. Teams oftentimes just kind of will play their game and force the opponent to adjust to what they're doing, especially two teams as good as these two. But in this matchup, maybe a little bit proactive, trying to account for some matchups. Detroit also a very heavy man team. And so like one example of the way that we could maybe see these teams adjusting a little bit more is the first time these two played, Detroit usually plays 60% man coverage. That dropped all the way to 50% in the first time they met. Christian Watson is kind of the obvious answer here. Fantastic man splits. He's, all wide receivers have good matchups against this Detroit team by the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data. And on top of that, Detroit has allowed a lot of those bigger plays, and that's Christian Watson's music. So everything's kind of pointing to Christian Watson. But when you look at who he's had success against this season, it's not the teams that you would expect to be good matchups for him. It's been zone heavy teams and things of that nature. So it's just a kind of a really, really weird game in that regard. The two guys who do stand out to me are David Montgomery in the receiving game. He's at 2.8 yards per route run against zone coverage this season. It's actually the highest yards per route run on the entire Detroit team. Wouldn't expect that. I think Montgomery over 2.5 receptions for 1.2x is fantastic. I also like the over 17.5 receiving yards, but I think I like the 2.5 receptions a little bit more. He's had 3 receptions in 3 straight games, 4 of the last 5 and 5 of the last 7. Now you add in the zone heavy matchup here against this Green Bay team who's top 5 in zone rate. So I think Montgomery's great. He had 3 receptions the first time these teams played as well. So he's a really good one. And then the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data shows this is a terrible matchup for Tucker Kraft. Let me bring this up real quick. So you can see Detroit negative 38% to opposing tight ends. They've been a good matchup for every single wide receiver spot. So rough spot for Tucker Kraft here. And Kraft is at 38.5 receiving yards, which he has gone under in 8 of 12 games this season. Romeo Doubs is out again, so maybe he's getting some boost there, but I think this is more just an overreaction to how good Kraft was last game. But we were all over Kraft last game because of the matchup. This is now a terrible matchup. So under 38.5 receiving yards for Tucker Kraft, over 2.5 receptions for David Montgomery are kind of my starting point on the football side.
Yeah, the AJ's in here. The wonderful Shazam saying the Monty one cracked him up when he sorted the YPPR for them. Small sample, thinks the reasoning makes sense. And look, so the only thing I was going to add to that, and we can leave AJ's comment up on the screen, was, again, I'm not as in the weeds as you guys, obviously focused on the hoop side, but I have felt a little bit of this from the season-long perspective. I traded for Monty in multiple leagues, and I was not counting on the couple catches that I'm getting every game. That's been a great boost, and so it's nice to see that the data is also saying that that's not necessarily just kind of a one-off, right, in the last couple weeks. That it's something that we can expect to continue, and we like it at the 1.2x number there. So.
One other thing I'll say on the receiving matchup for Montgomery, Green Bay also near the top in screen pass yards allowed, and so Montgomery also benefits from that. Maybe they catch him in a blitz, like I mentioned this in the chat as well. The first time these two teams played, it was a very positive game script for Detroit and very negative for Green Bay, which probably contributed to the blitz rates, but Detroit blitzed a lot less than they usually do, and Green Bay blitzed a ton more than they usually do. So again, probably game script related, but also could have been a little bit of just kind of trying to change things up to catch their opponent off balance a little bit. So really kind of unsure of what we're going to see in a lot of ways in this matchup, but the kind of the things that I do expect to continue are Detroit's going to remain a great matchup, or a terrible matchup against 4 tight ends, and Montgomery's still going to see a lot of zone, and for whatever reason, he's been targeted a ton against zone. As AJ pointed out, like he's not running a ton of routes, so we have to actually hope that it happens when he's on the field. But he's been on the field plenty, and actually they really, really liked him in that first game, which might have been conditions related. It was really wet, so maybe they felt like the Gibbs speed and explosion couldn't really been taken advantage of the way it usually can. But it also could just be some kind of matchup thing in the run game where they really like the way Montgomery sets up against this Packers team.
Yeah, and just clarifying there, right? Because I'm saying YPPR here. This is yards per route run, YPRR. So we appreciate that correction there. And then Albert, I adjusted my volume, so hopefully I'm coming through a little bit more clear here. So we got the 2 NFL picks in, right? Let's turn to this NBA slate here tonight. 8-game slate in front of us. If you're on DraftKings, of course, it's 7. They don't want us to have fun with the no Steph Curry, no Draymond Green Warriors and the late night hammer. So if you want that action, you're either playing Showdown on DK or you're over there on FanDuel. From our prop perspective on Underdog this morning, and there's a couple prize picks, fantasy score props that I'm eyeing this morning as well. But starting here on Underdog, let's go to that late night game with no Steph, with no Draymond, let's talk about Jonathan Kuminga. Now, Warriors hosting the Rockets here tonight. And look, man, the Rockets are good. And that may be an understatement. Like, this is not an easy matchup, but I think this line is a little bit too low for what we should expect out of Jonathan Kuminga in a spot like this. And I didn't mention this yet. Andrew Wiggins also questionable. Now, I think either Andrew Wiggins is going to play. This is now a 4-point line in favor of Houston. So it is trickling towards the visiting Rockets. So maybe now that lean not so strong. You also have Fred VanVleet questionable on the other side. So we'll see how that shakes out. But knowing that we have no Steph, knowing that we have no Draymond, in the 21 games, right? This is where we expect Jonathan Kuminga to continue to start as he did last game, and the minutes to be a lot less volatile than they have been throughout the rest of this season. So if you go back to the start of last season, Alex, when Kuminga is playing 30 or more minutes, it's 21 games. He's over in 14 of those 21. And in 2 of those 7 misses, he had 18. So again, tough matchup against Houston. So what has he done in his short career? Not so short, maybe at this point. This is like year 5, I think, for Kuminga. He has played 26 minutes as a minute ceiling twice against Houston. Once was in March of last year. He had 17 points. And once was the meeting between these two teams in the first week of November this season. And he had 23 points in 26 minutes in that game. So again, that's just a 1-game sample from this year. But he was not stymied by the, again, above average wing defense and overall defense that Coach Udoka has this Houston team playing. The model does not necessarily agree with me here, as it does on some of the other picks we have this morning. Mm-hmm. So this is more coming from the Noggin model, just kind of leaning into Kuminga's bigger role here tonight. What we've seen him do in shorthanded situations for this Warriors team over the last year and a quarter. I really think this line is too low. I expect 20 plus from Kuminga here. And to be honest, I don't think it's crazy to take a look at potential ladder opportunities for him because the usage is going to be there.
Yeah, I think that was one thing I wanted to point out. Like, given that points per minute that we've seen for him against Houston, the over 24.5 at 2.17x I think is interesting.
Yep.
6.07x, like that's a nice jump from 2.17x, but I don't know. That might be too much of an ask. Do you have a preference on any of these ladders here?
It's probably the 24.5. I want to pull up. I can actually just boop. We can go back. I was already looking at Jonathan Kuminga game log, so that's in the history there. One thing I do want to note, if you just narrow it down to this season, of course, it is a smaller sample size than what I was pulling from the games where he's played 30-plus minutes. Yeah. But with in a 163-minute sample with Draymond, DeAnthony Melton, and Steph Curry off the court, 34.6% usage rate for Jonathan Kuminga this season. So again, that's like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander levels with Chet in, but still, right? So like 18.5 points. I really like this this one here tonight. In terms of Jonathan Kuminga's, like, what are his top scoring games like in his career? What's his career high? Because again, he can put the ball in the basket. Let's see. That didn't give me what I want.
As we look at this, I do want to bring up the point, like, it's a little bit tough to just kind of look, well, what are his like highest games in terms of scoring? Because when you look this season, 20, 21, 23, but those are all in 26, 29, 26 minutes. So to some degree, we want to look at points per minute ceilings for him. I also think it's worth pointing out, it's obviously a very small sample against Houston. The only reason why we're considering that is because the thesis of this play is not he has had success against Houston. The thesis of the play is that he stands to benefit both from a minutes perspective and a usage perspective from the guys out. We're only using that Houston sample to kind of check for how affected he might be by the matchup. So I think both of those things kind of important to point out. Also had 26 against Memphis, 27 against Dallas in 35 minutes, 26 against San Antonio in 30 minutes. So I think that 24.5 at 2.17x is close for me. I think I just like the standard a little bit more. I'm actually a little bit more tempted by the 29.5 at 6.07x if you think that we could be seeing 30 to 36 minutes, something like that from him tonight.
I don't think we get to that kind of level with him because, again, it's still Steve Kerr still wants to, it's going to be harder for him to flatten out this rotation tonight, but not impossible for him to do, right? And I'm clicking on the Pistons instead of the Warriors. You look at last game, right, where you had Steph Curry in there, but you had no Draymond Green. You had Podziemski and Kuminga already in this starting lineup. Just 29 minutes for Kuminga, and he closed that game. It wasn't a blowout scenario against the Nuggets. So, but now missing Steph Curry and potentially missing Andrew Wiggins. Like, if you miss Andrew Wiggins in this game, this line is going to be at least 21.5, in my opinion. And again, I like it even if Wiggins is in. I think I'm with you where I'm probably just going to stick, at least at this point of the morning, with the 18.5. I'm fine if you go to the 24.5. I just think I would shy away from the 29.5 because then we're basically predicting a new career high. He's gone over that number once in his career. And again, there is a big enough sample size of Kuminga in shorthanded situations, Kuminga in a starting type of role with his minutes, and he just doesn't score over 30. He's done that once. So again, I think 18.5 is just where I'm going to stay here for the morning.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's just better to stay on the standard here and not bet on the like outside ceiling performance from him. So I like this 18.5 number. And should we go to the blocks and steals next, or do you have some other picks right on?
Let me get this one off my chest because this is my favorite one of the morning. Let's go to Jeremy Sohan. We're going to San Antonio, hosting the Bulls here tonight. No Victor Wembanyama. So we will talk plenty about the Spurs when we get to the DraftKings side a little bit on FanDuel. But Spurs favored by 2 here. I know the Bulls aren't any great shakes, but Kobe White is out. Q-tag on Josh Giddey. 236 implied total. Now Sohan is coming back from the fractured hand, right? He made his return last game off the bench. I believe played right around 22 minutes. So what I'm looking at is his PRA here, Alex. The number's at 21.5. I want to go higher than that. And like I said a minute ago, this is my favorite pick that I have found on Underdog on the NBA side this morning. Sohan has taken a step this year, both with his statistical production and just how it looks on the court on both ends, averaging 26.5 PRA in 28.4 minutes per game across his 8 appearances. So again, it's a smaller sample size than what we are dealing with guys who have been mostly healthy. Sohan obviously missed a little over a month, but that average in that 8-game sample includes the 12-minute outing against the Clippers where he fractured his hand in the first place, and it includes the 28 minutes off the bench against Phoenix. He's over in 6 of those 8. One of those misses, of course, was the 12-minute game. So in games where he hasn't been injured, he's over in 6 of 7. I think we're going to talk about Charles Bassey, and we're going to talk about Zach Collins on DraftKings because DraftKings fumbled the ball. We had that Wemby news mid-afternoon yesterday. They still post those guys at or near the minimum, but I think Jeremy Sohan could certainly play some time at the 5 tonight. It's not like Chicago is an overly sizable team with Vooch, with Jalen Smith. Like, these are guys that I think the Spurs are completely comfortable with Jeremy Sohan going out there and playing a little bit of small ball 5. Even if we don't get that, Alex, he has not been playing the small ball 5 this season, right? But before he hurt his hand, it was Wemby, it was Zach Collins soaking up 48 center minutes in the majority of those games. But again, he came off the bench last time. I think he could get back into the starting lineup here because I don't think the conditioning is a huge factor. Again, got back to 22 and a half minutes against the Suns the other night. He will close this game if it's close, whether he starts or not. He closed against Phoenix. Up-paced game. We talked about the close spread. And we haven't projected for just 25 minutes here. So probably another bench role in that instance. And we have him for 23 PRA. So I think he could start. And if he does, that minutes projection is going to be 28, 29, maybe up to 30. And then this line will be, 4 or 5 too low in that instance. So I really like Sohan in this spot.
Yeah, I love this one. A couple things that I'll point to here. Chicago dead last in points in the paint allowed. They have allowed the second most assists per game. And then another way that I like to look at this is, all right, 21.5 PRA. I might just be interested in the points and assists based on those two stats, but they're at 14.5. So just a difference of 7. And he's averaging 8.3 rebounds per game, potentially in less minutes than we're even going to project him for tonight. So it just seems like, the PRA is also great. If you wanted to go to points and assists, I wouldn't blame anyone there. But kind of just go all around here. And then if he eventually has a fantasy score prop, I'd also be interested in that one, most likely later. But the 21.5 PRA, I think, is good to go right now.
Yeah, I agree. And looking for that fantasy score, Underdog's not going to be that good to us today and give us a Sohan fantasy score, but Prize Picks very well might. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we will certainly have our eyes for the fantasy score props. All right, let's take a look at the stocks board before I have two picks that I think might correlate a little bit. I'm interested to see if Underdog's going to penalize us, though.
Yeah, and real quick, I one thing I'm considering adding to the tracker, or maybe we'll just kind of do on my own as just my own analysis, is kind of looking at, how are we doing on stocks props versus points props versus fantasy points, all that sort of thing. My inclination is that we have been really, really good on the stocks props. Yeah, we didn't hit it on the steals yesterday with Chris Dunn, but let's remember that was a 1.25x prop. Like, that was not one that we were necessarily expecting to hit. It was just good value at 1.25x. But we've been really solid on these stocks props. So I think we've also been quite good at not forcing it with these stocks props. Just because they're giving us a bunch of them doesn't mean we have to take any of them. But Tari Eason hit once again. So anything kind of standing out to you at first glance? I think Amin Thompson 2.0 is the first one that catches me.
You pulled it right out. I mean, are you looking at my screen? I have two different Amin Thompson tabs up right now. Looking at that flat 2 in terms of his stocks, he is averaging 2.1 on the year. That's 26.5 minutes per game. Now, we have seen those minutes come back down after he went on a little bit of a stretch there where he was closing these games and playing mid-30s in minutes, got up to 40 minutes against Philadelphia, your Sixers, last week.
He went 7 stocks, 6 stocks, 0-0. That is as volatile as it gets. So I think the 2.0, I do think, is an overreaction to the fact that he has 0 in the last 2 games. His minutes have come down, but I think we should still be projecting him somewhere around 2.5 stocks. So 2.0 is just too low.
Yeah, we've got him a hair over 2.6 here. So I don't love it because it's that, like, I wish they would just give us a higher multiplier and give us the 2.5. I would definitely be on it then. I'm pretty tepid on that.
What do you think of the fact that Golden State missing a bunch of guys? Like, I usually like going for stocks props against teams who aren't going to have the ball in the hands of the players they typically have the ball in the hands of.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like, maybe taking a look at some of the guys, the turnover rates for a Brandon Pajemski, the turnover rates for a Jonathan Kuminga, some of the guys we think are going to have those higher usage rates tonight with those guys out, right? So you're looking at Kuminga, you're looking at Buddy Hield, Moses Moody, and then Brandon Pajemski, of course, is going to handle the ball plenty. Looks like his turnover rates are pretty much in line with last year, right around 12.5%. That's not crazy. Guess we could also look at turnover rates with those guys off the floor. Doesn't jump up, but still in that 11 range. Again, I think I'm just going to end up pretty tepid on the Amin Thompson right now because it's at the flat 2, and I don't want to push. But I think it says something that of the 8 or 9 that we have here, that both you and I immediately saw that Amin Thompson and wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
Don't like the Mobley. Sar? I could look into that a little bit more.
Yes.
You talk about short-handed teams tonight. The Wizards are certainly one. Keyshawn George, Corey Kispert, Kyle Kuzma, all out. Malcolm Brogdon and Pat Baldwin Jr. are questionable. And taking on Dallas, where I'm not sure it makes sense. Not that the Wizards care about much making sense right now. They are doing exactly what they want to do, losing almost every game that they have played so far this season. But I think we could see Sar slot back in at the 5 against this Dallas team. My only if they were healthy, I would say that is exactly what I expect. But the fact that we're missing multiple guys that can and have started at the 4, with Sar at the 5, in Keyshawn George, in Kyle Kuzma, much lesser extent Corey Kispert, right? I would probably call him the 3, and Bilal Coulibaly the 4 in that instance. But still, Sar probably going to start alongside Valanciunas, considering the injury report there.
I've got one that I like here.
Okay.
Shai Gilgeous-Alexander over 1.5 steals, averaging 1.8 per game. Toronto boosting steal production for opposing point guards by 64%. So I think that's a really solid one for Shai. And he is averaging a full block per game, so 2.8 stocks versus 1.8 steals. But because it's such a good steals matchup, I think I prefer the 1.5 steals. I was kind of hoping that we'd have a little bit of a boost here for it, but I think even at just the traditional payout, I think I still really like this Shai number at 1.5 steals. How do you feel about this one?
Yeah, I don't hate it. I'm not over the moon for it. We are projecting him right around 1.6, so slight lean towards that higher than though. I just wanted to jump back real quick. Looking at the projection for SAR, it's 3.5, and we're getting what 1.15x there. Okay. We do have him for 32 minutes, which that's a little bit hot here on the morning run. I think 30 I could get with, but he has gone over 32 minutes exactly once this season, so that projection is going to come down, and his stocks projection, of course, will slide down incrementally with that. But I don't hate it since we're getting the 1.15x, and again, I don't expect him to start at the 5, but that it still could happen, which in that case, I think that line would be too low.
Yeah, it's a slightly positive steals matchup for him and pretty neutral blocks matchup for him. So the 1.15x, I think, is probably the way to go there. What are his actual averages? Let's see. So we're getting
1.8 blocks,
2.5 stocks from him, 0.7 steals. So yeah, I think the stocks is probably the better way to go there. And that's only in 26.8 minutes. So even if we don't have him for 32. Still probably going to play more than his average so far this season. So I think that's solid all around with that nice little boost there. I think at 1.0, like it would still be a lean and not a play, but at 1.15x, I think it's a play.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Sacramento and Memphis here. I want to start with Domantas Sabonis. They're on the road tonight visiting the Grizz. Grizz are 3-point home favorites. We got a slate high 241.5 implied total in this one. So I'm looking at Sabonis and his assist line. It's set at 5.5 right now. And you can see on the screen, we get the 1.06x multiplier there. We got him projected for 6.5 in the FTN model this morning. So the model definitely agreeing with me in liking this one here. Sabonis, he's over this number in just 11 of his 20 appearances this season, so slightly more than half. But he's averaging 6.3 on the year, and he averaged 8.2 last year, right? And we kind of expected some of this with DeMar DeRozan coming in, much more of an ISO player and takes away some of those potential assists. But he's over in 5 of his last 8 against this Memphis team, and 2 of those 3 misses, he had 5 assists. So the assists do come historically for Sabonis against this team. Again, with the close spread, the total that just projects this game to fly over 240 tonight. I'm a pretty big fan of this Sabonis assist number. And I think I haven't dove into the numbers since Malik Monk came into this starting lineup. I don't think that hurts Sabonis, his upside for his potential assists either on the surface, because Malik Monk is more than capable, I think probably above average at being able to play off the ball, as good as he is in an ISO situation as well. Catch and shoot, cutting to the rim with Sabonis operating at the nail or at the top of the key. Like, I don't think we're losing anything putting him into the starting lineup over more of a catch and shoot guy like a Kevin Huerter or a Keon Ellis, somebody like that. DeRozan is my big concern.
Yeah,
he's going to be out there tonight. But again, this line has come down in accordance with what Sabonis has been doing this year. 2 assists less than 2 assists per game than he had last year. But 1.06x with the model saying 6.5 tonight. I like this one.
Not only that, but when Monk comes in the starting lineup, it might actually take away some of those DeRozan isolation possessions as well. So in a weird way, it could actually help this Sabonis line. So yeah, I'm close to liking this one as well. I will say Memphis, despite the really high total here, they've allowed the 7th fewest assists per game. So that has me a little bit hesitant, but we're getting a little bit of a boost here. So I think that's certainly in play. So we actually kind of have 7 in play right now. So let me, if we wanted to call it 8, we even could do that. So since we're not actually recommending a full play at the moment. Let me throw all of this in here right now, and we can just kind of run through everything that we have talked about on the show so far. So we have 8 here. Montgomery over 2.5 receptions, 1.2x. Tucker Kraft over 38.5 receiving yards. Kuminga over 18.5 points. Sohan over 21.5 points plus rebounds plus assists. Sarr over 2.5 stocks. Sabonis over 5.5 assists. Gilgeous-Alexander over 1.5 steals. And Amin Thompson over 2.0 stocks. I don't know exactly what I'll be playing, but I know it's going to be a combination of what is on the screen right now. Anything else that we haven't touched on that you want to bring to our attention here, Zach?
The last one that I was looking at, and this was mostly because the model was screaming this as a play in my face this morning, is De'Aaron Fox and his points prop. It's set at 24.5. Again, we talked about the game environment there in Memphis tonight. He's averaging 27.2 on the season, but he's only over this 24.5 number in half of his 22 appearances. And again, like, I think that points per game number, it's very fair to say, in my opinion, that is boosted by the games that he played without DeMar DeRozan, without Sabonis, without Malik Monk, or some combination of that trio over the last month or so. But in 3 of those 11 misses this season, he was right at 24 points. And again, the model has him for 27. So, is that not factoring in that those guys are coming back? It should be. That's what the model does, right? So I think it likes the total here. I think it likes that we should be getting full minutes out of De'Aaron Fox. And unless Underdog is going to ding us too much for putting this in there with the Sabonis assist, like, if they don't penalize us for that, then I love this even more, because we've seen plenty of Sabonis to Fox over the last couple years. And I think that would be a nice little pairing in there, unless they're really dinging us.
Yeah. So if let's see. Oh, I'm gonna have to take some stuff out to do this. Let me just drop the NFL picks real quick.
Sure.
So we are at. Let me drop. Let's do this the easy way. Okay. Let's get rid of the multipliers so that we. Okay. So now this should become 25x times 1.06. Based on that Sabonis one. So we are getting 26.5. We're not getting penalized for that correlation. So the points for Fox with the assists for Sabonis looks pretty solid for sure.
Nice. So and the other 2 we had in there was the Shea steals and the Amin Thompson stocks, right? So for a 6er there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you want that NBA 6er, I like that one.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you could also drop those and add the 2 NFL picks back, whatever you want to do. So lots of options tonight. Lot of play. It's weird. Like it seems like we don't have. I would say the Tucker Kraft one I feel really good about. The Montgomery one I feel really good about. It sounds like the Sohan one we feel really, really good about. And then from there, it's like usually we maybe find 1 or 2 that we kind of have a lean on. We have a lot of leans and not a lot of other conviction plays. So. I think if I had to guess right now, I would say I will probably play a 3-pick of those 2 NFL ones plus Sohan to start, and then maybe mix in this Sabonis and Fox correlation a bit. Also might just kind of hold off to see if I have more conviction on guys as we get closer to lock. Plus we have the show with Prop God and Two Gun at 5:30. So maybe Prop God will come in with some fire and convince me to have a little bit more conviction on some of these other plays in the NFL game. So I don't know exactly what I'll be playing yet, but as always, you guys will know once I do, we will post those exact plays in the tracker and in the Pick'em Discord.
Yeah, and if you're just looking for a 3-pick, I would go for the NBA side rather. Mm-hmm. For me, it's Kuminga, Sohan, and Sabonis are my favorite 3. If you don't want to be throwing in the 6 or the 8 picks here tonight. Anything else for you on the prop side?
No, and I haven't been able to get ownership of. I was hoping to be able to do that while we were on stream, but it's really hard to do while on stream, believe it or not. So I haven't been able to do that yet. So what I'm going to do instead is let's just bring up the DraftKings slate. We can kind of look at the pricing and stuff and see if anything stands out here. Can also kind of look at the potential injury news. So
yeah, while you do that, I can talk about some of the injuries. Of course, I mentioned no Wemby. We talked about no Steph and Dre with Andrew Wiggins questionable. Of course, that's not on the DraftKings main slate, but it's for you FanDuel folks. And again, you could be playing the showdown or the late slate there. On DK, no Kevin Durant for the next week. For Phoenix, Washington, already shorthanded. Q tags on Brogdon and Baldwin. Grady Dick and Jakob Poeltl are questionable. That is a questionable for Poeltl as of this morning, added to the injury report with an illness. So maybe talking Bruno Fernando, Jonathan Mogbo, Chris Boucher by the time we get to lock. We will see. Kobe White is out on the other side of that Spurs game. Josh Giddey is questionable. With no Wemby in that 236 implied total, I think we got to have some interest in Chicago as well. Pelicans have Q tags with Brandon Ingram, Yves Missi, and Herb Jones, who I think Herb Jones, I would be the most confident of the three in him making his return tonight, because he has made that progression now from out to doubtful, now questionable. I think he gives it a go here. And we also said Fred VanVleet questionable for Houston in that late night hammer. So a lot of news that has already come through, a lot of stuff, Q tags that are pending. And of course, we will get our customary 2 or 3 questionables and not late scratches, but scratches throughout the afternoon, as we tend to do. On DraftKings, it starts with San Antonio today. There's no way you can avoid it, because they did not update the Spurs pricing for no Wemby here tonight. So Zach Collins, 3.5K, Charles Bassey at the flat 3K minimum. It's really hard to build a lineup without one of these guys in there because of those prices. You can absolutely pair them. And the one thing I will give DraftKings credit for, which they probably shouldn't get credit for because they made the mistake in the first place, but Jeremy Sohan was center only last game, which makes 0 sense. Now power forward only, so we like to see that correction coming quickly. So it's not just the front court guys, though, too. Of course, that a ton of usage to be spread around with no Victor Wembanyama. Devin Vassell got up to a season high 27 minutes. I think may have crested 28 last time out. He's 5K. He has been shooting off the charts so far this year in his bench role. Alex, 48.8% from 3 so far. So I do think that starts to come down a little bit. But again, with the usage increase, how efficient he has been at 5K in this matchup, I think you have to have some interest in Devin Vassell. Chris Paul is also going to project pretty well. I think without Victor in there, I prefer Vassell for $900 less. And we could see them shake up the starting lineup, of course, not just replace Victor Wembanyama. I don't think it's crazy to see Steph Castle go to the bench here or in the near future. You could also see Julian Champagnie, Harrison Barnes. It's a weird situation for Coach Mitch Johnson here, interim Coach Johnson, because you want to get these minutes to Vassell. You want to get these minutes to Sohan. But the role that the veterans and Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes have been playing, and the way that Julian Champagnie spaces the floor, we could see a more significant lineup change here tonight. But I don't have confidence in any, no sort of conviction on calling what will change there, if anything. So that's something. This is an 8 p.m. Eastern tip-off. So I'm personally hoping that we get that lineup after main slate lock, because I'm going to have plenty of ways to swap around and try to take advantage of this somewhat ambiguous situation outside of the bigs here this morning.
Yeah. Do you want to talk through the Bassey versus Collins debate? Like, who do you expect to be more popular? Who do you think you're going to lean towards?
I think people are going to go to Bassey because he's done us well this season without Wembanyama. But you got to remember that Zach Collins was 5,500, 6K, something around there in those games. And Bassey, who we were on before the field, we had him the one night. He got 30 DK at min price, 1% owned. Not going to be far from 1% owned tonight. And again, I think he may come in more popular than Collins. I expect Collins to start. I expect him to at least split 24-24, if not lean towards Collins. But we could be surprised. And if Charles Bassey starts, then I will eat that crow and we will play Charles Bassey. But Zach Collins at 3,500 is just unbelievably solid as a play.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised if Collins is every bit as popular, if not more, just because, to your point, like, remember the last time we saw this, it was $4,900, $5,500, $6,000, and people love finding those big giant drops in price. So I think both of these guys will probably garner interest. What do you think of just playing both of them? If you get 48 minutes of the Spurs center between $3,000 and $3,500, that's probably solid, isn't it?
Yeah, and I also think, like, even if we have the red alert scenario where, like, let's say a full 8 minutes at center goes to Sohan in the worst, outcome for our Spurs center pairing there, 40 minutes of both guys who are well above a fantasy point per minute.
Right.
6,500, like that still feels pretty darn good. So yeah, I'm definitely not setting a rule against pairing those guys here tonight in my MME build. I think that's a perfectly fine way, especially if we think that most players are going to choose just one. That can get you a little bit different without having to go down to, make a pivot to somebody who's 2% owned and doesn't project nearly as well, what have you. But Alex, on the other side of this game, like if Josh Giddey is out, we've got min-priced Modest Buzelis over there. Ayo is 5,300. Of course, Vooch with no Wembanyama. That's going to look okay at 8,500. Levine, 76. And then, THT and Julian Phillips got the start last time out. Like, there's going to be value to be had on the Chicago side as well. And I don't think we should ignore it.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. One other point I want to make with the dual Spurs centers there, like you're using both center spots on a really cheap guy, which is why I don't think the dual center on San Antonio will be super popular. And what that's going to open up is potential pay up options at non-center positions. So it probably makes Luka a much better play. Probably makes Shai Gilgeous-Alexander a much better play. Obviously, you can't play Sabonis, Towns. You can't play Jokic. I think a lot of people will try to go Jokic plus one of those Spurs min-price centers. So are there any forward pay-ups that you really like on this slate?
Well, we did just get they're not going to come from the Pelicans because we just got Pels news. No Daniel Tice, but all three questionables, Messi, Herbie Jones, and Brandon Ingram, all available to play here for the Pelicans. So really just waiting 2 more weeks for Zion and Jose Alvarado to be back. And look, they're in my favorite team's division there with the Spurs, but I want to see a healthy Pelicans team because I think that team can be extremely fun if they get healthy. Are we ever going to see that? History says probably not, but
I like him saying extremely fun too, not extremely good, because I don't know how good they're going to be, but they are going to be fun.
Yeah. So, and I think that is going back to what you were talking about centers and the spend ups overall on the slate. Like, if those Spurs guys are going to keep the ownership down on Jokic, then if I'm running just one lineup, like even against Cleveland here tonight, Jokic is still going to separate from the field in terms of his raw fantasy point projection. Luka's going to look good as well, but Jokic is averaging basically 70 fantasy points on the year. It's really tough to get away from, especially when we're going to have the value at the guard and forward positions where we don't have to double up the Spurs centers. Again, this is why I play my 20 maxes, so I can run a bunch of double Spurs and I can still run a bunch of Jokic. In terms of the forward position, it's a tough ask to spend up tonight. Like Scotty Barnes is not in a good matchup against the Thunder. J-Dub, I think, is overpriced with Hartenstein in the lineup now, and he's not playing those center minutes. Brandon Miller's getting all the usage he could ask for, but 8,500 against the Knicks, I'll probably have some, but it's really tough to get excited for any of these guys. Bradley Beal's up to 8,300 with Kevin Durant out. How do we make Bradley Beal 8,300 when we leave the Spurs centers at mid-price? It's just like, come on, interns, like let's pick it up here. So it definitely reads like people are going to spend up on guards, spend up on Jokic, and fill in with the Spurs value, the Bulls value, and any other value that pops. We will get some.
Yeah, I agree with that. It could also just be like a dual point guard spend up day where you go Luka and Shai.
Sure.
But I think you nailed something there on Jokic, where I think what we can say with certainty right now is either the dual center value play from San Antonio is going to be underowned, or Nikola Jokic is going to be underowned. One of those two things has to be true, and we can just kind of wait and see where ownership goes before making our decision in that regard. Or like you in 20 max, you can just play both regardless. But I think that's kind of like the biggest thing about this slate that I want to see is just how do people treat the center position? Because like I said, either that dual San Antonio center lineup or the Jokic play is going to be really underowned. And that's just like a very easy path to build from.
Yeah. And then you also have, you have a 9K Karl Anthony Towns against Charlotte. Right, yep. Like you've got there's other centers I know. I mean, I mentioned Vooch right in that matchup against San Antonio at 8,500. it's hard to see those guys picking up any ownership in the in-between there, kind of sandwiched by the two kind of roster builds we're talking about. So like I mentioned at the beginning, like I'm excited. I think this is going to be a really fun slate and interesting to watch the ownership fluctuate throughout the day leading up to lock.
And with each additional name that you drop there, it makes me think more and more that the people aren't going to play both San Antonio value centers together. So that's my lean at the moment, but we'll see exactly how it shakes out. Reminder, everybody, tune in 5:30 Eastern, 2 for the Millie. Thanks for tuning in. We will catch you next time.